Kinetic priming, friction-induced ignition. The human biological engine cannot directly generate combustion. Instead, it must apply focused kinetic energy, in this case, mechanical shearing with a steel edge against dry biomass, to generate focused thermal energy. This is not just lighting tinder, it is about physically reducing the surface area of the fuel to maximize the rate of rapid oxidation. Biological thermogenesis. Internal core regulation. Hypothermia is a failure of metabolic output. Before insulating, the body must generate heat. This is achieved by utilizing stored chemical potential to drive massive involuntarily synchronized muscle contractions, shivering. This kinetic activity violently releases thermal energy, which is the singular purpose of the primary metabolic engine during thermal crisis. The thermodynamic barrier. Convective heat regulation. To stop core decay, you must physically decouple the body from the environment. This means engineering an atmospheric barrier that traps a still layer of air. An emergency blanket must reflect radiating energy back to the core while simultaneously blocking external cold air currents from violently extracting the trapped air layer. Hydrostatic regulation. Internal osmolarity stabilization. Hydration is not a subjective choice. It is critical for hydrostatic stability and fluid dynamics. Survival often dictates that the biological core requires some liquid dynamic flow before osmoregulation is critically lost. Stabilization is achieved not by immediate water saturation, but by physically reintroducing dynamic flow, even in microdoses, into the system. Dynamic pressure signaling. Acoustic energy generation. Visual signaling has limitations. Acoustic signaling relies on generating maximum dynamic pressure with minimum metabolic energy. A high-efficiency whistle must generate rapid acoustic waveforms that cut through environmental noise, utilizing the principles of compressed air and resonant dynamic frequencies to maximize detection. Refractive optical vectoring. Photonic data transmission. When dynamic acoustic signals are invisible, the core strategy relies on focused photon energy. A signal mirror does not shine light. It utilizes direct solar radiation, mathematically aiming the reflected photon path directly to the target. This relies on the perfect flatness of the refractive plane to ensure high-intensity data is transmitted over miles. Cellular oxygen debt. The 3-minute threshold. The human brain cannot store oxygen. Without continuous atmospheric inhalation, neurons undergo irreversible necrosis within 180 seconds. In a survival scenario, establishing a clear biological airway always supersedes shelter, water, and caloric intake. Ground thermal extraction. The law of conduction. Sleeping directly on the earth is a death sentence in cold environments. The ground possesses infinite thermal mass. It will relentlessly extract your metabolic heat through direct physical contact until you reach thermodynamic equilibrium. Cellular desiccation. The 3-day fluid limit. Without continuous hydrostatic intake, the human body loses volume. Blood viscosity drastically thickens, forcing the heart into critical overexertion, while the kidneys shut down to mathematically preserve the remaining biological water reserves. Glycogen depletion, the 3-week caloric decay. The body stores energy as glycogen. When deprived of food, it violently shifts metabolism, cannibalizing its own fat cells and eventually muscle tissue through autophagy to maintain baseline internal thermodynamic operation. The combustion triangle. Exothermic chemical release. Fire is not an object, it is an active chemical reaction. It mathematically requires absolute ratios of atmospheric oxygen, dry biomass fuel, and localized thermal heat to violently break molecular bonds and release trapped energy. Convective wind chill. Atmospheric heat stripping. Cold air is dangerous, but moving air is lethal. Wind physically strips the thin, warm boundary layer of air surrounding your skin, exponentially accelerating hypothermia by forcing the body to constantly reheat new freezing air. Evaporative cooling, lethal phase transition. Sweating in a survival situation is catastrophic. As liquid sweat mathematically converts into a gas, it forcibly extracts massive amounts of thermal energy from the skin. In cold weather, this instantly initiates rapid core temperature collapse. Infrared thermal loss, unrestricted photon emission. The human head does not inherently lose more heat than the body. It simply lacks biological insulation. Exposed skin constantly radiates infrared photons into the atmosphere, requiring an immediate thermodynamic cap to halt the energy leak. Microclimate selection, environmental thermal evasion. Survival requires exploiting topographical anomalies. By locating depressions or dense tree wells, you mathematically remove yourself from the macro environment, utilizing natural geometry to block prevailing winds and trap localized ambient heat. Topographical fluid dynamics. Gravity-fed accumulation is bound by unyielding physics. It will always seek the lowest absolute point of elevation. Survival requires analyzing the geometric contour lines of a valley to calculate exactly where subterranean hydrostatic pressure will breach the surface. Thermal pathogen destruction, cellular wall rupturing. Drinking raw water introduces lethal biological payloads. Bringing fluid to an exact 100 degrees Celsius mathematically induces a violent kinetic state, physically shattering the cellular walls of bacteria and rendering the liquid biologically inert. Botanical hydroextraction, cellular transpiration trapping. Trees act as massive hydraulic pumps. By sealing a transparent synthetic bag over living foliage, you physically trap the water vapor that the leaves naturally exhale during photosynthesis, condensing pure, biologically filtered fluid. Geomagnetic anchoring, ferrous alignment. A compass does not know where you are. It utilizes a freely suspended, magnetized ferrous needle that mathematically locks itself parallel to the Earth's absolute molten magnetic core, providing an unyielding baseline vector for geometric navigation. Magnetic declination, topographical grid variance. Maps are drawn to true geographic north, but the Earth's magnetic core constantly shifts. To navigate accurately over distance, the survivalist must mathematically calculate and subtract this angular variance or risk missing their target by miles. Solar trajectory tracking, astronomical shadow vectoring. The Earth's rotation is an unyielding constant. By planting a stick and marking the exact progression of its cast shadow over a 15-minute interval, you mathematically plot a flawless, absolute east-to-west navigational baseline. The stellar fixed point, axioplanetary alignment. Polaris, the North Star, does not move because it sits in near-perfect alignment with the Earth's rotational axis. By locating this singular photon source, you secure a mathematically flawless true north vector in total darkness. Biomechanical distance tracking, ranger beads. In featureless terrain, human perception of distance catastrophically fails. Using a cord with sliding beads allows the survivor to mechanically calculate every 100 paces, locking their exact geographical displacement into a rigid mathematical count. Contour line interpolation, two-dimensional elevation modeling. Topographical maps use concentric circles to represent mathematical changes in altitude. The closer the lines, the more violently steep the physical terrain. Interpreting these vectors allows you to navigate the path of absolute least kinetic resistance. Biomass insulation, the debris hut. A tarp alone provides zero thermal value. By piling 3 feet of dead leaves over a rigid framework, you create thousands of microscopic trapped air pockets. This thick biological barrier mathematically halts radiant heat loss from the core. Endothermic ice shelters, the snow cave. Snow is not solid ice. It is structurally mostly air. By hollowing out a mass of snow, you utilize the trapped atmospheric gas as an unyielding thermoinsulator, maintaining an ambient temperature near freezing, regardless of external drops. Aerodynamic deflection, the tarp ridgeline. Pitching a tarp flat allows water to pool, causing catastrophic structural collapse. By pulling the fabric tight over a mathematical center axis, you utilize acute geometric angles to instantly shed high-velocity wind and heavy hydrostatic loads. Friction locking, the taut line hitch. Knots rely entirely on surface friction. This specific configuration allows the rope to slide freely for adjustment, but instantly mathematically bites down and locks under tension, creating an unyielding anchor for shelter guidelines. Radiant thermal vectoring, the fire reflector. An open fire radiates heat in 360 degrees, wasting half its energy. By building a solid wall of green logs opposite your shelter, you physically intercept escaping infrared photons, mathematically vectoring them directly back into your thermal zone. Arterial occlusion, the combat tourniquet. Major arterial severing results in lethal exsanguination in under 120 seconds. This nylon strap uses a rigid windlass bar to generate massive, localized mechanical crushing force, completely halting high-pressure blood flow by physically collapsing the artery against the bone. Somatal immobilization, the structural splint. A fractured bone acts as a kinetic razor blade inside the tissue. A splint does not heal, it strictly enforces zero mechanical movement. By bridging the joints above and below the break, it mathematically prevents catastrophic internal severing. Hemostatic pressure, wound packing geometry. Surface bandages cannot stop deep hemorrhaging. To halt blood loss in a junctional wound, sterile gauze must be forcefully packed directly against the severed vessel, maximizing physical pressure to chemically trigger the body's natural coagulation cascade.